Hi everybody and welcome back. Today's story is one of the most jaw-dropping, blood-boiling, absolutely unhinged workplace stories we have ever covered on this channel. And I say that with complete conviction, because we have done a lot of bad boss stories on here. We have done micromanagers. We have done gaslighters. We have done the ones who steal credit, and the ones who play favorites, and the ones who make your life quietly miserable in ways that are hard to explain to people who have never worked for someone like that. But this one is different. This one occupies its own category. Because this is not about a bad performance review. This is not about being passed over for a promotion. This is not about missed overtime pay, or a stolen lunch from the office fridge. This is about a man who called his employee repeatedly, while she was on the operating table, while she was physically under general anesthesia, while a surgeon was literally working on her body. He called, and called, and called. And when she did not answer, because she was unconscious in the way that people under general anesthesia are unconscious, he wrote her up for it. He put it on her formal employment record, in writing, on company letterhead, that she had ignored him during surgery. I need you to understand that I am not exaggerating a single syllable of that. So get comfortable. Grab something to drink. This one is going to make your blood pressure do things. And then it is going to make you feel deeply, thoroughly, completely satisfied. Stay with me all the way to the end. Trust me on this one. My name is Rachel. I am 31 years old. I work in project coordination at a mid-sized logistics company based just outside of Manchester, England. I have worked there for 4 years. Before this story happened, I would have described myself as a reliable, hardworking, pretty low-drama employee. I showed up early most days. I stayed late when it was genuinely needed, not performatively, but when there was actually something that needed finishing. I never called in sick unless I was actually sick. I hit my targets consistently quarter after quarter. I got on fine with most of my colleagues. I had 2 close work friends I genuinely liked spending time with. I was not the most visible person in the office. I was not the loudest or the most political or the most networked. I was not the one who spoke first in meetings or stayed latest for optics. I was just solid, dependable, the kind of person a company is lucky to have and tends not to appreciate until they are gone. My boss was a man named Derek. He was 52. He had been at the company for 11 years and had made it to regional operations manager through what appeared to be a combination of being there for a very long time and being extremely loud about his own importance. Derek was the kind of manager who measured his own value by how much he could access you. He genuinely believed that being unreachable was a form of disrespect, not just during work hours. Ever. He would message on weekends. He would call at 7 in the morning about things that could absolutely wait until 9. He forwarded emails at 11 p.m. with the subject line, "Just wanted you to see this," and no further context. He once messaged me on a Sunday afternoon to ask if I had received his Friday email. The Friday email which I had in fact received and had flagged for Monday morning. He could not wait until Monday morning to confirm I had received his Friday email. He sent a Sunday message about it. That is the man we are dealing with. He was not malicious exactly. He was just deeply, chronically incapable of understanding that other people had lives that existed outside of his operational requirements. He treated everyone's personal time like it was on loan from the company, like we were all operating on a 24-hour lease that he had the right to call in at any moment. And because he had been doing this for 11 years and people had generally absorbed it and adapted around it rather than pushing back, he had concluded that this was simply how things were, that this was normal, that this was what commitment looked like. Everything was perfectly manageable. Or so I thought. I had been dealing with a medical issue for about 8 months before my surgery. I do not want to go into the specific details because it is personal and frankly not relevant to the story. What matters is that after months of appointments and tests and consultations with 2 different specialists, and after 2 rounds of medication that provided partial relief, but did not fully resolve the underlying problem, my specialist recommended a surgical procedure. Not emergency surgery. A scheduled, planned elective procedure. The kind that gets booked weeks in advance and appears on your calendar. My surgeon walked me through the process in clear detail. The procedure itself would take approximately 2 to 3 hours. I would be under general anesthesia for the duration. I would spend time in recovery after that before being discharged. And I would need a minimum of 2 weeks off work to allow for initial healing, followed by a more gradual return to full function over 4 to 6 weeks. These were not loose suggestions. These were clinical instructions from a medical professional. and I intended to follow them. I told Derek about my surgery 6 weeks in advance. 6 weeks? I did not have to tell him that early. I could have given him 2 weeks' notice and been completely within my rights. But I wanted to be professional. I wanted to give the team time to redistribute my responsibilities while I was out. I sat in his office with a cup of coffee and I told him the date, explained that I would be out for 2 weeks minimum, and offered to document all my current projects in detail. So the handover was smooth. Derek's response was not what I would describe as warm. He did not ask how I was. He did not say hope it goes well. He did not ask if there was anything the company could do to support me. He looked at his calendar and said 2 weeks is a long time, Rachel. I said I know, but it is medically necessary. He said we will need to make sure nothing falls through the cracks. I said I will document everything. He said good, and went back to whatever he was looking at on his computer. That was the end of the conversation. No quorums. No human acknowledgement that his employee was having surgery. Just a calendar concern and a pivot back to his screen. I walked out of his office and I remember thinking, well, that was that. What I did not say in that meeting, and what I want to say now for context, is that Derek had always been like this. The surgery conversation was not an anomaly. It was just Derek as he always was. He had been this way about every personal situation any of us had ever brought to him. When my colleague James had a family bereavement, Derek had given him 3 days off, and then emailed on the 2nd day to confirm he would be back on the 3rd. When my other colleague Priya had her appendix out on an emergency basis, Derek had called her husband's number trying to get an update on when she would be back. Not whether she was okay. When she would be back. This was the shape of the man. The company was the thing. The people were the resource by which the thing ran. And a resource that was unavailable was a resource that needed to be addressed. That was Derek's operating framework, and it had apparently worked for him for 11 years because no one had ever pushed back hard enough or in the right direction to change it. Until now. I spent the next 3 weeks building the most thorough handover documentation I had ever put together. Every active project. Current status. Key contacts. Deadlines. Escalation paths. What was urgent? What could wait? What needed monitoring? I shared it with Derek and with my 2 colleagues who would be covering while I was out. I walked them through it in person. I answered every question. I sent a follow-up email summarizing the handover meeting and the agreed responsibilities, so everything was in writing. I did everything right. I thought I had handled it as well as it could possibly be handled. I took the day before my surgery off as my surgeon had advised. I rested. I followed the preoperative instructions. I set my out of office on my email. I changed my voicemail. Both stated clearly that I was on approved medical leave and would return on a specific date. I turned off my work phone notifications. I went to bed early. The next morning I drove to the hospital with my partner Tom, and I checked in for my surgery. I do not know exactly what time Derek started calling. I was obviously not in a position to know. I was in a hospital gown waiting to go into the operating theater. I had handed my personal phone to Tom to hold while I was in surgery. My work phone was in my bag in a locker. I remember the nurse who put the cannula in my hand. I remember the anesthesiologist asking me to count backward. I remember nothing after that for several hours. What I can tell you is what Tom told me afterward. Tom said that between the time I went in for surgery and the time I was moved to recovery, my work phone received 11 calls. 11. Not one check to see if there was a signal issue. Not 2 calls because something was genuinely burning. 11 consecutive, escalating calls from Derek's number. There were also 7 text messages. Tom could see the notifications lighting up through the mesh of my bag without unlocking the phone. He had read enough of the previews to understand what was happening. The first text said, "Rachel, call me when you get a chance. Then call me when you can, bit urgent. Then Rachel, I really need to speak with you today." Then becoming more pointed with each one. "Rachel, this is the 3rd time I have tried to reach you." And eventually, sent approximately 90 minutes into my surgery. "Rachel, your failure to respond is unprofessional, and I need you to understand this is a serious matter." A serious matter. I was under general anesthesia on an operating table with a surgeon's hands inside my abdomen, and Derek was composing messages about my professionalism. Tom said he had genuinely picked up his phone twice to call Derek directly. He had put it back down both times. He did not want to escalate anything while I was in surgery. He figured I would deal with it when I was awake. He said the second time he put the phone down he had to go for a walk around the hospital corridor just to calm down. I love Tom. When I came out of recovery, I was groggy and sore, and Tom was sitting next to me, and the first thing he did was hand me my work phone with this expression on his face. The kind of expression that says I am trying to be calm for your sake, but I want you to know internally I am not calm. I looked at the screen. 11 missed calls. 7 messages. I stared at it for a moment. I was still coming out of the anesthesia fog. My throat was dry from the breathing tube. My abdomen felt like someone had rearranged things in there, which they had. And Derek had apparently spent my surgical window treating my absence as a professional failing. I read the last message. The one about professionalism and serious matters. I put the phone back in my bag. Tom said, "Do you want to deal with that?" I said, "Not today. Not today. Not even a little bit today." I spent one night in the hospital as recommended. The next morning I was discharged with a list of post-operative care instructions and a clear directive from my surgeon to rest, not exert myself, and not engage in stressful situations for at least the first week. I came home. Tom helped me get settled on the sofa. I slept most of the first day. On day 2 I checked my work email out of habit, against my better judgment, and I found an email from Derek sent the previous evening. The email stated, and I am reading from my notes here because I saved it, that my unavailability during a critical operational period had been noted, that my failure to respond to multiple attempts at contact reflected poorly on my commitment to the team, and that he would be documenting this incident formally. He used the word formally. I read the email 3 times. I put my phone face down on the cushion next to me. I looked at the ceiling. I had been out of surgery for 36 hours. I was still in post-operative recovery, and my manager had just told me he was going to formally document my unavailability. I did not respond. My out-of-office was still active. My surgeon had told me to avoid stress. I chose to follow my surgeon's advice rather than Derek's email. Tom read the email over my shoulder and said some very colorful things that I will not repeat here. Over the next week, Derek sent 3 more emails. 2 were operational questions that were clearly covered in my handover document, if anyone had bothered to read it. One was a follow-up to the formal documentation email, saying he wanted to schedule a meeting upon my return to discuss the situation. I read each one. I did not respond to any of them. My out-of-office replied automatically with my return date and the names of my 2 colleagues covering my work. That was the agreed arrangement. That was what I had set up 6 weeks in advance with Derek's knowledge. I returned to work 2 weeks later as planned. I felt well enough physically. I was not 100%, but I was functional and genuinely ready to be back. I walked into the office on a Monday morning. The familiar smell of the place. The hum of the printers. Colleagues saying good morning and welcome back. It felt normal. I had barely taken my coat off when Derek appeared at the end of the room. He walked over. He said, "Rachel, my office, when you have a moment." His voice was businesslike. Not hostile but not warm. I said, "Of course." I hung up my coat. I took a breath. And I walked into his office knowing exactly what was on the other side of that door. I sat down across from him, and he pushed a printed document across the desk. It was a formal written warning. Printed on company letterhead. Already completed. Already typed up. Already waiting. The reason listed was failure to maintain communication and respond to management contact during an operational period. That was the language. An operational period. The specific 2-week window during which I had undergone a surgical procedure, spent a night in a hospital, and recovered in my home under medical instruction was being referred to in this document as an operational period, during which I had failed to respond to management contact. I read it twice. I looked up at Derek. I said, "Derek, I was in surgery." He said, "I understand that, Rachel, but there were urgent matters that required your input." I said I was under general anesthesia. He said, "I appreciate that, but the team needed guidance." I said I documented everything in the handover file 6 weeks in advance. He said some things came up that were not covered. I said then the appropriate response would have been to escalate within the team, not call me 11 times while I was on an operating table. He blinked. He said, "I did not know the exact timing of your procedure." I said it was on the exact date I told you 6 weeks ago, and my out-of-office message confirmed I was on approved medical leave the moment you tried to contact me. He said, "Rachel, I need you to understand that this company cannot function if key people are simply unreachable." I looked at him. I looked at the document. I said, "Derek, I would like to take this document to HR before I sign anything." I took a breath. I said, "Derek, I would like to take this document to HR before I sign anything." He said, "That is your right." His tone made it clear he thought it was a formality. that I would go to HR. HR would explain the process to me, and I would come back and sign the warning, having understood that this was just how things worked. He looked mildly inconvenienced, like I had added an extra step to something straightforward. I stood up. I picked up the written warning. I walked to HR. The HR manager was a woman named Sandra. Sandra had been at the company longer than Derek. She was measured and professional, and I had always found her to be genuinely fair in the situations I had observed her handle. I knocked on her open door. She looked up. I said, "Sandra, do you have a few minutes?" She gestured to the chair. I sat down. I placed the formal written warning on her desk. I said I received this morning from Derek, and I would like to understand whether this is a document I am expected to sign. Sandra picked it up. She read it. She read it a second time. Her face stayed neutral, but there was a quality to that neutrality that told me something was registering. She looked at me over the paper and said, "Rachel, can you walk me through the context here?" I did. I told her everything. The surgery date, the 6 weeks advance notice, the 3 weeks of handover preparation, the documented projects, the colleague briefing, the out of office and the voicemail, the 11 calls, the 7 texts, the email about formal documentation sent the day after my surgery, the 3 follow-up emails during my medical leave. I had my work phone with me. I showed her the call log with timestamps. I showed her the message chain with the escalating tone. I showed her the email chain, including the one about serious matters sent while I was in the hospital overnight. I showed her my out-of-office reply functioning correctly the entire time. Sandra looked through everything. She was quiet for a long moment. Then she looked up. She said, "Rachel, I appreciate you bringing this directly to me." She said, "Please leave this document with me and do not sign anything yet." I said, "Thank you." I stood up. I walked back to my desk. I sat down, and I felt, for the first time since coming back to that office, that something was going to happen. Something real. What happened over the next 2 weeks I learned in pieces. Sandra investigated thoroughly. She spoke to Derek on 2 separate occasions. She reviewed the full company medical leave policy, which stated clearly that employees on approved medical leave are not required to be available for work communications, and that attempts to contact employees regarding work matters during medical leave should go through the designated cover arrangements. She also reviewed the company's disciplinary policy, which required documented evidence of actual misconduct before a formal warning could be issued. She found no such evidence in my case. She found the opposite. She found an employee who had given 6 weeks advance notice, built 3 weeks of documentation, briefed her colleagues, set her out of office and voicemail, followed every single procedural requirement, and been unreachable during surgery for the entirely unsurprising reason that she was unconscious. Sandra also spoke to my 2 colleagues who confirmed that the matters Derek had deemed urgent had been handled within the team without any input from me whatsoever, and without any actual operational crisis occurring. There was no emergency. There was no critical situation. Nothing had burned down. Nothing had been lost. Everything in my handover document had functioned exactly as designed. The cover had covered. The system had worked. The only thing that had not worked was Derek's ability to reach me, and his inability to reach me had produced no operational consequences. It had only produced Derek's personal discomfort. And that personal discomfort had then been translated into a formal written warning on my personnel file. Sandra understood exactly what that meant. She also understood, I suspect, exactly what it could mean for the company if I had chosen to take it further than HR. Derek was spoken to formally. The written warning issued to me was rescinded in its entirety, removed from my record. It was as if it had never been placed there. Derek was required to complete additional management training covering employee rights, medical leave legislation, and appropriate workplace communication standards. He was also required to submit a written acknowledgement to HR confirming that his conduct during my approved medical leave had fallen below the expected standards of the company. I was told about all of this by Sandra in a private meeting in her office. She looked at me across the desk and she apologized on behalf of the company. She said clearly and directly that what had happened was not acceptable and would not stand on my record. She asked if I was satisfied with the resolution, or if I wished to pursue any further steps. I said I was satisfied for now. I kept the "for now" very intentional in my phrasing. Sandra heard it. She nodded slowly. We understood each other. Derek and I did not have a meaningful conversation for about 3 weeks after that. He spoke to me about operational matters when he had to. Professionally. Briefly. Without any of his usual commentary about unreachability and commitment, and key personnel being available, the energy had shifted completely. It was like watching a balloon with a slow leak. That particular confidence he had always carried about being able to reach anyone at any time. It was deflated. And it stayed deflated. I stayed at the company for another 6 months after that incident. 6 months of Derek being a ghost of his former self in terms of out-of-hours contact. 6 months of a cleaner, quieter working environment that I honestly had not realized I had been missing for years. Then I left for a better position at a different firm. 40% pay increase. A proper title that reflected what I actually did. A real management structure with clear reporting lines. And a line manager named Claire who, in our first one-to-one meeting, said something I wrote in my journal that same evening. She said, "I want you to know that your time outside of work hours is yours. If something is genuinely urgent, I will flag it clearly and explain why. Otherwise, you will not hear from me after 6 p.m., and I do not expect to hear from you." I sat in that meeting and I thought about 11 calls to a hospital locker. I thought about Tom's face when he handed me my work phone in the recovery room. I thought about a printed document pushed across a desk and the words operational period. And I thought about how deeply strange it is that basic human decency in a manager can feel like a gift. Simply because the bar elsewhere has been set so low for so long. Claire was just being a normal professional. But after Derek, normal felt remarkable. I went home from that first meeting, and I sat at my kitchen table, and I felt genuinely, completely fine. Settled. Like something had been put right that had been slightly wrong for a long time. My surgeon signed off on my recovery at the 8-week mark. Full function. No complications. The procedure had worked exactly as intended. My body was fine. My new job was fine. My evenings were mine. And somewhere across Manchester, Derek was sitting in a mandatory management training session with a written acknowledgement in his file that his conduct had fallen below company standards. I like to think he had a lot of time to reflect during those sessions. I genuinely do. Not with any bitterness. Just with the quiet satisfaction of someone who did everything right, and let the process confirm it. Okay, I need a moment. Because this story does something to me every single time I read it. Rachel, you handled this with a level of grace and composure that I am not sure I could have managed. She was 36 hours out of surgery and Derek was emailing her about formal documentation. She came back to work 2 weeks later, sat across from the man who wrote her up for being unconscious, and calmly said she would like to take the document to HR before signing anything. She did not cry. She did not escalate dramatically. She did not call him every name he deserved to hear. She walked to HR with her evidence already on her phone, and she let the process work. And it worked. Because she had done everything right. And Derek had done everything wrong in a way that was so clearly, so completely, so undeniably documented that HR had essentially no choice but to act. And on behalf of every single person watching this video right now, Rachel, you are absolutely not the a-hole. You are not even close to the a-hole. Derek put himself in that management training chair one phone call at a time. 11 of them, to be precise. 11 calls to a hospital. 11 calls to a woman under general anesthesia. And then a formal written warning about the professionalism of the woman who did not answer those 11 calls. The nerve. The absolute, staggering, unearned nerve. And I want to say something about the psychology of a manager like Derek. Because I think it is important, and I think a lot of people watching have worked for someone like this, and have never had it articulated properly. A manager who believes they must be able to reach you at any moment is not managing the work. They are managing their anxiety. The need to contact someone during surgery is not about operational urgency. It was never about operational urgency. The handover document existed. The cover team existed. The designated arrangements existed. Derek called 11 times because the inability to reach Rachel made him feel out of control. And instead of sitting with that discomfort and functioning like a professional, he externalized it. He made it Rachel's problem. He labeled her unavailability as a failing. He put it on paper. He tried to make her responsible for his emotional response to a situation that was entirely outside her control. That is not management. That is not leadership. That is a person who has mistaken their own anxiety for organizational necessity. And Sandra saw through it in about 45 minutes with a phone call log. 45 minutes. 11 years of Derek being Derek, undone by 45 minutes with a woman who read the evidence and understood immediately what it meant. Now let us talk about what the community had to say. Because the responses to this story were absolutely extraordinary. and there were some really fascinating debates happening in the replies. The top comment came from a user called Surgery is Not APTO, and it said 11 calls. 11. I want you to sit with that number. Not 1 call to leave a message. Not 2 calls in case there was a signal issue. 11 calls. That is not urgency. That is a man who cannot stand being ignored and dressed it up as a business need. The written warning was just the formality of his tantrum. That comment had over 14,000 upvotes, and honestly I think it is one of the most precise reads of this situation I have seen. The 11 calls are the whole story. 1 call and a voicemail is urgency. 2 calls is persistence. 11 calls over the course of a surgical procedure is something else entirely. It is a man conducting a power move on a woman who was physically unconscious, and then writing her up for it. The audacity has layers. A comment from UK employment law nerd said, just for everyone's information, under UK employment law, contacting an employee during approved medical leave regarding work matters, and then issuing a disciplinary document for their unavailability during that leave is not just bad management, it potentially constitutes harassment, and could form the basis of an employment tribunal claim. Rachel was well within her rights to go further than HR if she had chosen to. And this is such an important point. Rachel chose to resolve it internally. That was her choice and it was completely valid. But she had significantly more leverage than she perhaps even realized in that moment. The fact that HR acted as quickly and decisively as they did suggests Sandra was also very aware of the company's legal exposure. Derek did not just behave badly. He potentially behaved illegally. And the company knew it the second Sandra looked at that call log. Never sign anything first left a comment that said the most important sentence in this entire story is, I would like to take this document to HR before signing anything. Do not sign. Do not agree. Do not apologize. Walk to HR. That is the blueprint. That is the move. And I completely agree. That moment in Derek's office is the pivot of the entire story. A lot of people in that situation, still post-surgery, still not fully recovered, still processing the sheer audacity of what was on that page, would have felt pressured to sign. The authority figure has handed you a document. You are already anxious about returning to work. There is a pen on the desk. The path of least resistance is to sign and move on and quietly absorb the injustice. Rachel did not sign. She paused. She said 4 words. And those 4 words changed everything. A comment from Managing Up and Out said, I have worked for a Derek. Not literally this man, but this type of man. The weekend messages. The 7 a.m. calls. The forwarded emails at 11 p.m. for no reason. The constant need to access you as proof that he matters. When I finally left that job, I felt like I had been released from something. Rachel leaving 6 months later for 40% more money is the most beautiful ending I could imagine. And this comment got thousands of upvotes because I think it touched something real. The Derek types are everywhere. They are in logistics and law firms and hospitals and tech companies. They are at every level of management. And the damage they do is not always dramatic and singular the way this story is. Sometimes it is just a slow grinding wearing down of the belief that your personal time actually belongs to you. Rachel got her reminder that it does. And she got it in writing, from HR. There was a comment from Giving Derek the charity read who said, look, to be fair, maybe Derek genuinely did not know the exact time of the surgery and thought Rachel might be available before going in. And look, I will give this the 30 seconds it deserves. Derek was told the date 6 weeks in advance. Rachel's out of office stated clearly she was on approved medical leave. Her voicemail said the same. His texts became aggressive about professionalism within 90 minutes of starting to call. He sent a formal documentation email 36 hours after surgery. He had set up this written warning before she was even back to full strength. There is no charitable reading of this timeline. He knew she was on medical leave. He simply decided his need to reach her superseded her right to be on medical leave. That is the complete story. Finally, HR Win wrote a comment I keep thinking about. It said Sandra is the unsung hero of this story. A lot of HR departments would have found a way to make this complicated. They would have talked about procedures and given Rachel a form to fill out and scheduled a meeting in 2 weeks. Sandra looked at the evidence and acted. She protected her employee. That is what HR is supposed to do and so rarely does in practice. And genuinely, yes. Sandra looked at a call log with 11 entries during a surgical procedure, read a written warning citing professionalism, and understood immediately what she was looking at. She did not hedge. She did not balance it. She acted. That is a person doing their job with integrity. One final comment from Tom deserves recognition. said, "Can we talk about Tom for a second?" He watched his partner's work phone receive 11 calls while she was in surgery. He picked up his phone twice to call Derek and put it back down both times because he did not want to make things worse for Rachel. He walked the hospital corridor to calm down, and then he handed her the phone gently when she woke up and let her decide what to do. Tom is carrying this story alongside Rachel, and he handled it with just as much grace. And I love this comment so much because Tom really is in this story, quietly present, holding the phone, watching the notifications, staying calm for Rachel's sake while being furious on her behalf. That is someone being present in exactly the right way when it matters most. Well, the community is completely unanimous on this one. Rachel is not the a-hole. Derek is somewhere in a management training course thinking about his choices. But guys, there is an update. And the update adds one final detail that I need you to hear, because it is the cherry on top of an already extraordinary situation. About a month after Rachel posted her original story, she came back with an update. She said Derek had been unusually quiet since the HR intervention. Businesslike. Minimal communication. She said he had stopped the weekend messages entirely, stopped the 7 a.m. calls, stopped forwarding things at 11 p.m. for no reason. She said the office atmosphere around him had noticeably changed. Several colleagues had apparently become aware of what had happened in general terms, not because Rachel had told them, but because the management training had required his absence from the floor for certain sessions, and people had asked questions. Office rumor being what it is, the broad outline of the situation had traveled. Rachel said she had not confirmed or denied anything to anyone. She had just done her job. But she noticed that two other colleagues who had previously seemed to accept Derek's constant contact behavior as normal had started pushing back quietly. Not dramatically. Just. Not responding to the 11 p.m. emails. Not picking up the Saturday morning calls. One of them told Rachel privately that she had been afraid to push back before, because she did not know if she had the right to. And after seeing what happened with Derek and Rachel going to HR, and the warning being rescinded, she realized she did have the right. She always had. She just had not known how to use it. Rachel said hearing that was one of the most meaningful things to come out of the whole situation. Her experience had not just fixed her own problem. It had given someone else permission to protect themselves too. That is not a small thing. That ripple matters. She also mentioned something that I found quietly remarkable. Her two colleagues who had covered during her medical leave told her after her return that the urgent matters Derek had tried to reach her about during her surgery had been resolved within a single afternoon using her handover document. Everything she had documented. Everything she had prepared in those 3 weeks of meticulous handover work. It had worked exactly as intended. There was no crisis. There was no situation that required her unique input. Nothing was on fire. Nothing fell through the cracks. The system she had built functioned perfectly without her. The only thing that had apparently required her involvement, according to Derek, was Derek's need to feel like he had access to her. And that particular need was not an operational requirement. It was a personal one. A controlling one. And HR had made that very, very clear to him in writing. Rachel left 6 months later. New role. New company. New manager who understood the concept of personal time. She said in her final update that on her last day at the old company Derek had come to her desk and said something unexpected. He said, "Rachel, I want you to know I have been thinking about how I handled things earlier this year. I do not think I handled it well." Rachel said she looked at him for a moment, and she said, "Thank you for saying that, Derek." And then she turned back to her screen and finished packing up her desk. She said it was not closure exactly, but it was something, and she was ready to move on. That is the difference between a person who grows and a person who does not. Whether Derek's reflection was genuine, or whether it was the professional training talking, or whether he simply calculated that an apology was the politically sensible exit, Rachel did not need to determine that. She had already done everything right. She had already won. The apology was just the last echo of a situation that had already been fully resolved in her favor. She walked out of that building into a better job and she took nothing negative with her. Now I promised you a mood booster to close this video. And this one. This is absolute perfection. This is a petty revenge story from a narrator in the United States. And it involves a level of calm, deliberate, brilliantly executed patience that is going to make you stand up and applaud. Let us get into it. My name is Marcus. I am 36 years old. I live in Austin, Texas. I am a freelance graphic designer, and I work from home. This is relevant because working from home means I am in my house during the day. All day. I see things. I notice things. I hear things. And for 8 months I noticed my upstairs neighbor Gary doing something that slowly drove me absolutely insane. Every single morning without fail between 6 and 6:30 a.m., Gary would drag what sounded like a solid cast iron dining table across his hardwood floor directly above my bedroom. Back and forth. Scrape. Pause. Scrape, scrape. Pause. Scrape. I lay in bed every morning with my eyes open staring at the ceiling trying to figure out what possible activity required this. Was he rearranging his entire living room every single morning? Was he doing a furniture-based fitness routine? I could not figure it out. Whatever it was, it ended my sleep every morning without exception and started my workday with a headache and a mild simmering resentment that only got worse over time. I knocked on his door 3 times over the first 2 months. Gary was a large, friendly man in his early 50s who wore house slippers and always seemed pleasantly surprised to see someone at the door, like a man who did not get many visitors and found it a welcome change. The first time I knocked, he said, "Oh gosh, is that the chair?" I was moving my reading chair to the window for the morning light. He said it with such genuine surprise that I immediately softened. I explained politely that the sound carried quite a bit through the floor and asked if he could do it a little more gently or at a slightly later time. He said absolutely no problem at all. "I am so sorry about that." He seemed genuinely apologetic. I went back downstairs feeling resolved. The next morning, 6:15. Scrape. Scrape. Pause. Scrape. The second time I knocked, he said, "Oh, I am so sorry, I keep forgetting." Third time. Same apologetic face. Same genuine remorse. Same 6 a.m. Same noise. I believed him every single time. That is the thing about Gary. He was not dismissive. He was not smirking like some people in some other stories we have covered today. He was a man who genuinely could not hold a behavioral change. He had done this routine every morning probably for years, and my knocking had not yet broken the habit. 3 knocks. 0 results. I stopped knocking. It was clearly not the mechanism that was going to fix this. I started thinking. I looked into acoustic ceiling panels. Interesting but expensive, and installation would require landlord approval. I looked into floor underlays for the apartment above, the thick felt-backed kind that dampen noise significantly. Also interesting but not something I could install in Gary's apartment. I spent 3 evenings researching. And then I found it. Felt furniture pads. The small round adhesive ones that go on the bottom of chair legs to protect hardwood floors. They were in every hardware store in the United States. I found a pack of 30 premium thick ones for $4.99. I read the reviews. People used them specifically to stop furniture scraping on hardwood. They were universally praised. They were the exact solution to the exact problem. And I had an idea. I knew Gary went to the farmer's market every Saturday morning without fail. He left at 8 with his canvas bags and came back by 10. I had seen him leave many times from my window. On a Saturday morning in March, I watched him leave at 8 a.m. with his canvas bags over his shoulder. I waited 3 minutes. I went upstairs with my pack of felt pads and a small jar of wood-safe adhesive as backup. I knocked firmly to confirm the apartment was empty. Silence. I went to find Ray, our building superintendent. Ray was a practical man in his 60s who took pride in the building running smoothly and had always been friendly with me. I explained that I wanted to put protective felt pads on a neighbor's reading chair to prevent floor noise and protect the hardwood. I mentioned Gary was aware of the noise issue. Ray looked at me for a second. He said, "Sounds sensible to me." He let me in with the passkey. I had approximately 4 minutes. The reading chair was immediately visible near the large east-facing window, exactly where Gary had described it. It was a beautiful big wingback chair with wooden legs. And those wooden legs were sitting directly on bare hardwood flooring with nothing between them. I pressed a thick felt pad onto the bottom of each leg. For legs. 4 pads. I held each one for 15 seconds. I added a small dab of wood-safe adhesive to each as insurance. I put the remaining pads in my bag. I let myself out. I thanked Ray. I went back to my apartment. I made coffee. I sat at my desk. I designed a logo for a client. I did not think too much about what would happen next. The next morning I lay in bed at 6:14. Not because of scraping. Because I was a light sleeper, and my body had apparently programmed itself to wake at that time after 8 months of being trained by Gary's routine. I lay there. I heard footsteps upstairs. Gary's morning footsteps, which I could hear because that is simply how floors work in older buildings. I heard movement. I heard the unmistakable sound of a chair being pulled across the floor. And then I heard absolutely nothing. No scrapping. No grinding. No sound traveling through the ceiling into my skull like a slow daily alarm. Just the soft, smooth, essentially silent movement of a chair on felt pads gliding quietly to the window. I lay in my bed for another 25 minutes. Still, eyes open, listening to the beautiful absence of the thing that had been waking me up every morning for 8 months. I was slightly emotional about it. I am not ashamed to admit that. I got up eventually. I made coffee. I stood at my window watching the Austin morning come in, and I felt genuinely, completely, unreasonably happy about $4.99 worth of adhesive felt circles. Gary never mentioned the pads. He never mentioned the noise stopping. We passed each other in the building hallway about 2 weeks later. He said, "Good morning, Marcus. Lovely morning, isn't it?" I said, "Good morning, Gary, it really is." And that was it. Clean. Easy. No cuernis. No confrontación. No bad energy. Gary got to keep his morning reading chair at the window with the morning light. I got to keep my sleep. Ray got to feel useful and sensible. And a single hardware store purchase had solved in 4 minutes what 8 months of knocking and apologizing and headaches had completely failed to fix. Sometimes the answer is not confrontation. Sometimes it is not a formal complaint or a strongly worded note. Sometimes the most beautiful solution is the one that requires almost no conflict at all. Sometimes the answer is $4.04 and 4 little circles of felt. Play stupid games. Win stupid prizes. But also sometimes the answer is not a game at all. Sometimes the answer is just looking at the problem differently and finding the small, elegant, obvious solution that was sitting there the whole time. Rachel found it in Sandra's office with 4 words and a phone call log. Gary's problem was solved with felt pads and 4 minutes on a Saturday morning. Patience. Creativity. Staying calm when someone expects you to be reactive. Knowing your rights. Preparing before you need to. Walking to HR before you sign anything. These are the tools that actually work every single time. And I want you to leave this video remembering that. Whatever version of Derek or Marcus the truck guy, or Philip the credit stealer you have in your life right now, the answer is not a meltdown. The answer is a folder. The answer is documentation. The answer is 4 words said calmly, and then a walk down the corridor to the right person. Do things right. Document everything. Know your rights. And never, ever sign anything before you talk to the right person first. Thank you so much for watching today. If you made it all the way to the end, I already know you love these stories as much as I do. Hit that subscribe button. Save this one for later. I will see you in the next one.